welcome to the virtual towers of Binary Arcadia, where the games go on long into the night. In today's episode, it's the first part of a series that Rich and I are nicknaming Skull Sessions, or should that be Skulltiller Sessions? You'll see in a minute. It's a game, today's topic or game is very close to the channel, and in many ways it was the inspiration for starting the channel, as you'll learn more about. But it is the masterpiece Zelda Breath of the Wild for the Nintendo Switch. As I say, we're terming it a skull session, which essentially means it's a discussion. And specifically the agenda for today is going to be talking about the best bits, the worst bits, what could be improved, and finally, broader discussion of where we think the game sits in today's open world genre. A couple of bits just to mention, a couple of caveats. This video is very much, we're filming this in the context that we played and completed Zelda many months ago now. So it's not going to focus on the kind of granular detail, the anecdotal details of the game. Maybe that's material for another video on another day. But instead it's going to be more forward facing, looking at what's to come for the Zelda series and how it's going to evolve. But also, now we've had the time to think about it and form our opinions and thoughts on the game, we'd like to touch on those as well. So at the same time, we're going to assume that anybody watching this video has played a good deal of Zelda, if not preferably completed it like we have. Another quick thing to mention, that there will be spoilers ahead. We're going to be talking freely about the game, and whilst we're not going to be talking in massive amounts of detail, we are still going to touch upon some things that could ruin it for you. So you've been warned. So without further banging on in this video, I think we should kick off. Rich, do you want to tell us, do you want to start with what your history is with Zelda, and I'll follow up?
Yeah, so I was quite late to console gaming. I was a PC gamer, as you'll probably see if you watch the background videos that we've both done. So my first real console I got that was a Nintendo-based console was the GameCube. So the first Zelda I came across was Wind Waker, which is quite late to the series, which did come with a special edition of Ocarina of Time, which was played, and I really enjoyed that. And obviously completed Wind Waker, really enjoyed that. I know that had a lot of critics, but I did really enjoy that game. It was just really good fun to play. And then obviously that was sort of it for a while until obviously the Switch came along. What about you, Ben?
Yeah, I think it started a bit earlier for me. So I remember playing Link to the Past on SNES around a mate's house. So that was really my first kind of contact with Zelda. I enjoyed it. I didn't spend enough time with it for it to leave any, indelible marks, so to speak. So from there, it was Link's Awakening on the Game Boy, and the Game Boy Color, and I think it was Link's Awakening DX. It was called. I still got it actually, and that was a really good game. It's quite noted in the series.
Just to interject, did that get re-released on something like iOS, or I feel like I've played that on something. I don't know what though.
Yeah, you may well. I'm not sure. We'll have to fact check that and leave it in the comments, the viewership. But yeah, so Link's Awakening, and then Ocarina of Time was the next big one. I've told you this a few times already, Rich, but it was a very special Christmas. I played it. The demo had dropped at the local Dixon's branch, and my dad was kind enough to take a visit, and I played through Kokiri Village or Kokiri Forest for about, I think, half an hour, as long as I could, and I could have carried on for ages. But Christmas Day came. I'd obviously been going on about it for months to my mum and dad, and Mum, as a bit of a joke, put it in the stocking. So it was one of the first presents opened on Christmas Day, and to be honest, I was done at that point. I was just waiting for all the other presents to be unwrapped so I could get it on. And yeah, it was one of my favourite games ever, until we'll go on to talk about what might be my favourite game ever now. So yeah, that's pretty much my history. I did play Wind Waker as well. I played Twilight Princess. Did get on in the end with Wind Waker, but as you know, Rich, it wasn't the same as Ocarina of Time for me. But I did in the end. It got under my skin in the end, and obviously it's got a lot of style to the art design. I think I've been teased by I forget what event it was, but there was this realistic Zelda demo that was launched. I think it had like a big spider in it, Rich, did it? Or he was fighting it in a temple.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I think it was something like the GDC conference, Games Developers Conference, and that had got my hopes up. And then of course they scaled that down to the Wind Waker, and it lost a bit of its magic for me. And I went in with that, so I had to come back around, and I did like it in the end. It's a highlight of the series. So I think, Richard, we should talk about our run up to buying and playing Breath of the Wild, just to give the viewers a bit more context.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll kick off. I bought the Switch on launch day. It was obviously, I was watching all sorts of videos, and I have to give a shout out to the YouTube channel Game Explain, who, it's in the title, they explain games. And there was a particular discussion they did. I'm sure it felt about 4 hours long, and it was Andre, and I couldn't get enough of it. You know, I think my girlfriend thought it was drivel and couldn't stand it by the end of it, but I was lapping it up, and the hype had started big time for me. So yeah, I remember I wanted to share the experience, as we'll talk about with Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's a lovely experience to share, almost in a cooperative sense. And I think I perhaps influenced Rich with that by sharing a few choice screenshots early on in the game. I was trying to be careful not to twist his arm and push him into it, but just let him know this is a really good game, and I think he'd probably enjoy it. That probably brings us on nicely, Rich, to your side of that story.
Yeah, like see, I was like completely the opposite in that respect. I was sort of hands off to the Switch. I was interested, but not like, oh yeah, I want it. You know, I was sort of ear to the ground. I listened to bought a Wii, and I liked the Wii, but it wasn't really tickling my fancy, and the Wii U really didn't. And then, so I was sort of like a bit standoffish with the Switch, but once you'd started getting the old hype train towards me, and then once you'd actually got the Switch and were playing Breath of the Wild and sending screenshots through, and some of the noises you were making, it just felt like I had to get this. We know each other well, and it seemed like you were like, you need to get this. You're going to be kicking yourself if you don't, especially if you play it around mine or whatever. So that led me to, so I think it came out, I don't know, did it come out on Friday or something? And by by Sunday I ran around the local games, or I started to run around the local games stores, and the first one I rang had got one, so they were like, yeah, if you come now you can have it. Straight down there, traded a load of stuff in because I was pretty skint at the time to get it, and then and got it, and then that led to the weekend, or what we'll term the weekend.
The legendary weekend, yeah. So, I think it was about a week in that you'd had it. You obviously started the game, got past the Great Plateau, and then we moved, and then we had a chat. I think we didn't have much on really, did we? So we thought, do you want to come up, mate? Should we play some Zelda together? Because I think we were desperate to share what was going on, and we were doing it via text. And you came, mate. Came down in your chariot, and it all kicked off. We basically, I think, functioned entirely for Zelda that weekend. There was everything else was not a priority. So at one point, I think we tried to pretend to be normal human beings and perhaps take a trip to the pub just to break up all of the Zelda. But eventually we just came to the realization that, you know what, we don't care. We're just going to keep playing Zelda.
Stay in our geek bubble and geek out.
This is it, the binary towers.
Yeah.
Binary Arcadia towers themselves. So yeah, fantastic weekend, and some great memories were made. Which perhaps brings us on nicely to talk about, some of those best memories and those best bits in the game for us. So if I kick us off, Rich,
go for it.
The giant map.
Yeah.
What did you think about that when you first came across it? When that Great Plateau past and you had that at your fingertips.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You start the game on the plateau and you feel a bit hemmed in. You're like, oh, I'm not sure. You can see this expansive world like out in the far distance, and yeah, you're not sure what to make of it. And then it takes however long it takes, a couple of hours or whatever, to get through the plateau, and then you're down there, and it is grand. It is just huge, and you really don't get a sense of that when you first start, because those that play the game will know the map's not uncovered. You have to meticulously go to the towers and uncover the map, and it's not until you start to do that you really get a true sense of just the enormity of the map. It's just huge.
No, absolutely. You just get thrown in at the deep end, really, don't you? The Great Plateau is this little tutorial spot, and then when the walls come down and the glider gives you that freedom to literally go 360 degrees of choice wherever you want in any direction. I mean, I should say it does give you guidance, doesn't it, to the next story beat, but you don't have to do that.
No,
you don't want to. And I think, yeah, for me it was that they advertised a lot about, you literally go anywhere. So if you see it in the distance, you can go there. And in most games, and even open world games today, you get a sense that there is an invisible wall, that there is a limitation to how far you can go. And I suppose there is, in a sense, there is an edge of the map, but that is way far off, and you'd have to push on and on before you even get to that. And it's not really an invisible wall, is it, Rich? I think you just fall off and you die.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's like a gigantic island, isn't it? So it's just completely surrounded by water or valleys or whatever. If you jump down, or you just die. I mean, I don't know what would happen if you got onto one of them little rafts and went out into the sea, like past Ventide Island or whatever, but I don't know. You just die, I guess.
I've tried it.
Yeah, I don't know.
If you get circled around on the opposite side of the map or something. I've never tried it.
Yeah, I don't know.
But next up, I suppose it's a big important part of the world. We talked a little bit about the map. Did you want to talk about anything more about that, Rich?
Not in terms of... I mean, the only one thing I will say is the map. There's a lot of things going on in the map, so you might be traversing from one settlement stable to another, or from one, and it might be that the sparsity in terms of settlements or big things to interact with, but there's like thousands of little things to interact with. Chop trees down, hunt the wildlife, ride a stag, catch bugs. It's just endless, the amount of things that you can do to sort of occupy yourself between the settlements or the shrines or whatever it is that you go into.
Yeah, I was going to mention a bit about that you've got these, the Great Plateau kits you out with these runes, which is essentially a box of tools, physics tools, if you like, for manipulating the world and the environment you're in, which, as you say, you can both use them inside of shrines, which is a big part of the puzzle element of the shrines, but also outside in the world. And there's, in many ways, almost countless ways to solve problems. Any one or two problem, it's got, tens of different solutions to it because of this, dynamic way that the runes interplay with each other. And as you touched upon, Rich, environmentally and elementally, there's just so much going on. There's, the weather system, there's the day and night cycle. As you point out, you can chop down trees, you can make a fire. You've got almost a lot of resource gathering from like all the little collectibles and materials in the world, which more often than not are useful as well. They're not just there for the sake of it. So yeah, I think that's very true that it lives up to its name, doesn't it? It's Breath of the Wild. It is literally a wild and open world full of life.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I suppose along with that, it kind of builds into a sense that you get, because as we said, you start off the Great Plateau, you push down to the world, you can do anything you want. There's also, it's a wild world, it's a hostile world. It's somewhere that it does not suffer fools, does it, Rich, as we know?
No. Oh dear.
I think I checked on my Switch earlier, and it's 150 hours plus I've spent on the game.
Yeah.
And I did not check the amount of times I died, but I'm pretty sure it's over 150 times I died.
Yeah.
What about you?
Oh yeah. Sometimes it just feels like you spend most of your time dying. I'm sure the comments will say that's because we're rubbish gamers, I'm sure, but honestly, I would class us as all right gamers. We're not unbelievable, but it's just, there's so many ways to die in the game. Enemies, falling. I mean, I've died so many times while climbing, and the weather turns and it starts raining, and it screws you over.
Oh,
I mean,
that's a really annoying part. We'll save that for the worst bits, but that is dreadful, isn't it?
yeah.
I think they should have made that a little bit more. Maybe you slip a bit, but not fall entirely. And,
Yeah.
you know, you have to just pack up shop, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I'll have you know, by the way, I did die a lot, but I also did complete, what was it called? Was it called the Master Sword Trials or something?
Yes.
With downloadable content, which were very difficult, weren't they? It wasn't an easy challenge. So
No, not at all.
that's my saving grace. But yeah, I think just building on that, I think you have this wild world that you thrust into, and part of its magic is that whilst you are working through this world, finding your own way in it, learning more about it, you have this kind of very natural arc, a very natural learning curve, if you like. Which, you know, you could almost, we've said that you could compare it with an RPG insofar as there are elements of it. You've got your hearts, you've got the orbs that you either earn a heart or you can buff your stamina essentially for when you're climbing and swimming and that sort of thing. But you've also got your cooking, which is giving you temporary buffs like health, strength, defense. Is there any more RPG elements, Rich, that I've forgotten about?
Well, definitely the orbs.
The weapons themselves.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. There's lots of different weapons that get more powerful and etc. as the game goes on. But certainly that's how they've managed to create an RPG element without leveling up. So in the normal way you would on an RPG. So you sort of upgrade yourself through doing the shrines and getting the orbs, and then increasing your hearts and stamina wheels. That's how they've made it an RPG without having the leveling up system, which is quite clever, really.
It's beautiful.
It feels like more natural play than a normal RPG would be.
Yeah, and for that reason as well, it's more satisfying, isn't it? It's not just necessarily I do this and I know, in some RPGs they come up with all these tactics, don't they, where you can like leave it idling and it put on, for example, what was it, Final Fantasy Zodiac Age. There's ways to leave that idling where you can just literally level up because you've got automatic presets on the way the battle plays out.
Yeah.
And if you compare that, it's literally just grunt work. Whereas in this game, it's not just about one particular thing you have to do. It's not just about upgrading your hearts, your grip strength or stamina, mastering the cooking, collecting a good pile of weapons. It's also about learning about the world, learning about where you can go, where you can't go, how you should approach certain situations. And for that reason, it's just so much more rewarding because it is literally you mastering this wild terrain as opposed to, like Rich says, leveling up continually to become powerful enough to take on this beast.
I think
it's dynamic, isn't it, Rich?
Oh yeah, I think because generally in a more conventional RPG, you're leveling up based on killing animals or the players or whatever. Whereas in this game, you're leveling up through lots of different things. So like, the orbs in the shrines are got from maybe a puzzle you've done and solved, or maybe you've had to kill some enemies in there. Maybe you've had to, I don't know, whatever else you do in the shrines. But there's lots of different ways in which you're progressing further forward, rather than just, as you say, grunt work, kill all these enemies and you'll get the experience to go up to the next level. It's so much. I guess feels so much more natural, I guess, in some respect.
It's literally experience, isn't it? It's not experience points, it's just experience of the game in its pure and natural sense. So Yeah, but I would like to say that they've managed this in such a way that it feels like there's almost hidden stats. I've often thought, hang on a sec, how powerful am I now? I can take on this Lionel, and really not that much has changed. Surely they do have a leveling system that's just kind of undercover and they don't tell us about it. So it really is, like you say, Rich, it's really clever how they've executed it, really.
Yeah, although I've spoken to someone recently and they've sort of said does it feel like that because when you get further on in the game, you have better weapons, you have more hearts, you're more skilled at the game, so it feels like some of the enemies are easier or you've got better, but actually, is it just a case of literally you've got better stuff? There's no, you know what I mean? I get what you're saying.
I don't know. I think there's definitely a case of, yeah, you get better equipment, and obviously you've got a load more hearts. But it's also about learning the controls, isn't it? It's about situational experience. So you know that you learn an enemy's movements or what they might do next, and then you apply that. And that is part of what I think why it's the best bit, because it is so dynamic, and that you can from the start, if you're good enough, you can go and defeat the end boss, or you can go and take on a white Lionel or whatever. If you're good enough, it's available to you. There's no barriers. It's not like you're not level 99, so this area ain't for you right now. So yeah, I think that's why for me it's one of the best bits. Go on.
I was going to say, I do think that leads us on to another point for me, that the game feels such a friendly game to play. Like you, within 10 minutes of the opening, you feel like you've played this game before in some ways. It's such a welcoming game in that respect, and the controls are really user friendly. And certainly on the plateau, when you first start, it just feels like, have I played this before? They're really nice to play, and I think they've really worked numbers on that element of the game.
No, I definitely agree with that, and I think I know what you mean. Whilst it is a hostile world and it's a wild world, it's also, it doesn't force you to do anything. It gives you utter freedom, and because of that, it like you say, it's welcoming. It's welcoming you with open arms to take on, treat the world how you want to do it, or the task at hand, however you want to do it. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those games where, I don't know, maybe it's because we've played lots of the Zeldas, but it just feels like a game where you've played it 10 minutes, but you've somehow played it all your life. I don't know. Maybe it's just taken all of the best bits and all of the best, and then supercharged them to create this brilliant atmosphere and play. And yeah, there's just something about it that just makes it feel homely, even though you played it 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's got a lot of nods, hasn't it, to previous Zelda games. And whilst it's obviously its own blueprint, a brand new kind of type of Zelda, it does have a lot of references, and it feels familiar, yet at the same time fresh and new. So it's a really good balance there.
I think that's why we both spent so much time playing it, because it doesn't ever make you feel like it's a chore to play, which we've touched on recently, having both played and completed Red Dead. That is a bit of a chore to play. I mean, a brilliant story, brilliant game, but sometimes you feel like, flipping heck, this is just busy work.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, Rockstar, it's a brilliant game, and I really, really enjoy it, and I've got some great memories with that too. But as you say, Zelda's a welcoming game. It's pure fun. That's what their agenda was, it seems, when they created it. But with Red Dead, it's like the developers are imposing all these restrictions and all these strings on you of how they want you to play the game. And I felt that was at times a bit suffocating, and it kind of strangled that fun element as well. I mean, it's more realistic because of that, of course, and realism has a lot of beauty about it. But yeah, at the same time, I could definitely compare them, and they're like chalk and cheese in that respect.
I think that's why you're not like, sometimes you think time is very precious, but I don't think I've wasted that time playing Zelda. I think I'm so glad I invested that time into it. I feel like it's so rewarding, and I feel like that was worthwhile putting my time into that because I got a lot out of that, you know.
Oh, absolutely. And just, I suppose that just to come back to the point that we've talked about it being this wild world that, you know, really gives freedom to the player, and you learn it as you progress very naturally. I think what another great thing about it is that part of the joy of it is this freedom of discovery. That there's so much going on in this world. We've talked about the shrines. We've not really mentioned that these Korok seeds they've got that fill the world. The divine beasts, the four divine beasts, which just essentially replace dungeons of the old Zelda format. And Rich, you mentioned stables. You've got your horses, and the settlements around the map. So for me, it's like it's this really full world. In some ways, we'll come back to that one, I think, but it's this really full world that's paced in such a way that there's always something new to discover. So even though, you know, you might feel you're a veteran of the game, you've done all your divine beasts, you've got, say, 90 shrines out of the way, and you're starting to really come into your own and feel like you're mastering this world, well, you know what? It's going to throw up another surprise at you around the corner. And that could be anything. That might be a new discovery. So that's, for example, Rich, when you found the giant horse.
Yeah.
The giant OP, overpowered horse.
Yeah.
And you put me onto that, and I went and tamed the beast. But it's that's part of its beauty.
Because I didn't.
Yeah, well, your stamina wasn't quite up to it at the time, was it?
No, I think I was only off the plateau about 15 minutes or something, and then I'd seen this horse and was like, oh, what's that? Went down there, not the stamina for that, and then you rock up with your, at this point, I don't know, 50 hours gameplay, and just trot away with this horse.
Well, the discovery was yours, and it will always be yours. I can't claim that.
I never went back and got one.
No.
Oh, you tainted it for me.
Yeah, I'm tainted because I got it first.
Exactly.
I called it Ganon.
Yeah, nice.
It was like a big Ganon-coloured powerhouse.
Yeah, I like it.
But yeah, just to come back to that point, that I think that's a wonderful thing with the game, that you can learn to master it, but there's always something that's going to surprise you around the corner, and that could be any number of things, as we said. Sometimes it's just literally something that happens in an enemy interaction. So, you know, something slightly different happens, it takes you by surprise, and it floors you, and you kind of feel you're almost back to square one, back to the drawing board, and it's another kind of, feather in your cap that you take with you on your journey. So anything else to add on that front, Richard?
I do think that leads us on to something that I think is really good about the game. There's no real set path. It's not particularly linear. Like, you could go the beasts which you need to tame. Well, I guess you don't have to tame them to complete the game, I guess. But you don't have to do them in any particular order. You don't have to necessarily take the path that the game sort of leads you in. You can take a completely different path and start differently. I've seen videos of people that are literally off the plateau straight to the final boss. It's a literally do what you want. It's like compared to games like Uncharted, which are like uber linear. There's literally one route to go, that's it. Which are great games, don't get me wrong, but this game, even though it's open world, it sort of says, there you go, do what you want. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter what order you do stuff in. I'm sure that Nintendo intended for there to be a sort of sequence in which you would do it in, but there's nothing that says it has to be done like that.
And I think, you know, well, my personal opinion is I feel that the world itself, you know, the physical world, and we've talked about the gameplay dynamics and all these overlapping systems. I think for me, it's pretty clear that all came first. So they were developing this kind of concept of what Breath of the Wild would be, and they developed the world first, and then the story came later. I think the way it comes across, and we'll touch on this when we talk about some of our worst bits of the game, but I think the way it comes across is it's clear the world came first, that pure fun of this giant Hyrulean sandbox that you play in. That clearly, for me anyway, came first. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that one.
Yeah, it definitely it feels like that. And like you say, when we get to worst bits, I'm sure we will touch on the story. But yeah, I agree. It definitely feels like one thing was developed, and then they were like, right, okay, that's a really cool thing you've created. How can we make that into a fully formed game? And I think potentially that's maybe where it falls down a little bit from being 100%.
Yeah, definitely.
I
think it was so big, isn't it, that they took on such an ambitious project, and yeah, like you say, we'll come back to that one.
It almost to the point where it feels like a studio is making the map, a studio is working on the story and that, and then they've sort of dropped one over the other and sort of made it work. That's almost what it feels like.
I'd absolutely say that. Because as we know these days, big projects like this take hundreds of games developers, don't they? Working on them. And it's almost like, we'll come back to it, but the story itself, I've got some comments literally very much in that line of thinking. So the couple of bits I just wanted to mention myself was, we've talked about, how packed the world is, and it's really nicely paced. And just specifically some of the kind of mythical or mystical elements in there. So you've got the dragons, your 3 kind of dragon gods that roam around. We've talked about the giant horse, but there's other little kind of, what do you call them, legendary horses that you've dotted around that you can find, and some of them tame. You've got things like the Hinox fights, which are a really big favourite of mine, because they're just amazing in themselves, and the music I just absolutely adore. It reminds me of Clash of the Titans or Jason and the Argonauts, which was this old stop motion animation film, which has a lot of sentiment for me when I was growing up. You've got the fairies, and I think all of those combined together, they give the game another dimension. So obviously it's got all these kind of great gameplay dynamics. It's got all your standard, your settlements, your missions, but these mystical elements, it's almost like it's a hint towards, another level in the game. And I think that's what I find with lore in games. I think they call it lore, history and lore in games. That it gives a real depth to just the surface details you find. And just to give an example, in GTA, there was, for a long time, I think it was San Andreas specifically, there was all these rumours of other secret things like UFOs and Bigfoot that you could find in the forest. And I don't think Bigfoot has ever actually been found, but it was just the kind of mystique of that rumour that got gamers, all riled up, and everybody was looking for it in the forest. Everybody wanted to be the first to find it. And it's those sorts of hidden depths and secrets in games that I think those mystical elements in Zelda tap into, for me. I don't know how you feel about them, Rich, if you enjoy them or not.
Yeah, they were cool. I love the dragons. The dragons were so cool. Just
seeing one on the horizon, dancing.
And what is that? The first time you see them, I'll never forget that. You're just
I'm pretty sure we sent a picture or a screenshot to each other and said,
definitely. What is this, mate?
What's this?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it is cool.
But that touches actually into some of the kind of the end game, which again I did appreciate. I really enjoyed the fact that the fairies who made your armor, they improved your costumes essentially. That then you could get set bonuses on the costumes you had, and to do that, especially for the end game stuff, a lot of the materials and resources you actually had to farm from these dragons. So that became for me, a really kind of fun, grindy experience where I could go after, collect these resources, and just make my Link, even better, even more powerful, and, the strongest thing in Hyrule. So yeah, you didn't get on so well with that side of things, Richard.
I don't know, it felt like an added thing to do that I was just not interested in. I just didn't have time to invest in it. There's too many other things to do in the game in that respect. Which is quite cool that we both played the game and both had, quite a different gameplay really. You felt that was a really important thing to do, and to and with other games since you love the collectible items and that. Yeah, so I sort of did a little bit with the fairies and upgraded some of the costumes, but it just felt like a bit of a grind. And then I get to the point where I didn't have some of the materials, and I was just like, oh, I'm done with that bit of it. I'm going to press on with finding the shrines or the bits of the game which I maybe enjoyed a little bit more than that part of the game. So that's why I didn't really invest as much time into that as you did, maybe.
But that's the key point, isn't it? The meaning in the world is defined by you and what you enjoy.
Exactly, yeah.
And like you say, it's so welcoming. Most of it is optional. So you can really just take what you like and do what you like in this world. No strings attached, no narratives applied. So the other bit, just wanted to briefly touch on from my side, Rich, was the castle, which I thought was brilliant. It was... I made this kind of analogy in my head that it was kind of like, if you remember the house in Home Alone. So you've got, what was it, Hank and Marv?
Oh, yeah.
The burglars anyway, trying to break into this house, and they take all these different routes, and there's all these different traps along the way. But it's a bit like that. You've got this big kind of, it was very much like a dungeon.
Oh, yeah.
The most similar thing to a classic Zelda dungeon. And you could attack it or infiltrate it in all these different ways, and you discover all these layers and floors of enemies. And yeah, I thought that was a really, really nice climax to the game, really, in that respect. So, did you enjoy it, Rich?
Yeah, definitely. Really enjoyed it. There seemed like there's endless rooms and corridors and ladders and different. It seemed like such a mass complex that you turn a corner and it opens up into another room that's full of enemies, full of things you can farm, and yeah, it's quite expansive considering, I guess from the outside it doesn't look that big really compared to the rest of the world, but yeah, inside it was just like a time drain with the amount of areas you could go in, and like I say, rabbit holes you could end up going down.
Well, this is it, and just to give you a bit of an anecdote, I know we're not going to go into too much detail, but the first time I saw one of the skeletal Hinoxes, you know the ones I mean?
Oh yes, yeah.
You have to knock their eye out to kill them.
Yeah.
That was in the castle. So that's just absolute proof of what we've been talking about, that however many hours you put into the game, and at this point I was probably 80 odd hours in, there was this new thing to discover, and it just keeps offering surprises to you.
Yeah, that's it. That's one of the best things about it. It just keeps giving, doesn't it? You think, oh, I've done 100 hours on this, I've seen it all, and then there's something else that you're like, I've not seen that before.
So I think we can't not talk about the best bits and not mention the two real, I think, standout things for us, and we could probably dump the rest of the game and just be happy with one, the shrines, and two, Eventide Island.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, for me, the shrines themselves were just, they were just such a pleasure to play. I mean, a bit frustrating at times. Some of them were difficult, but there's 120 shrines, as the initiated out there will know, and they are basically these little, they're puzzles essentially. The tools that we've mentioned, these physics tools or runes. So what have we got, Rich, in terms of the runes?
Well, we've got remote bombs, both round and square. We've got stasis, which basically locks an object, which you can then apply.
Load it with kinetic energy.
Yeah, exactly. And you can use that on objects, animals, and enemies. You've got Cryonis, which is where you can basically create ice blocks from water. Magnesis. They're the main ones that were all used within the shrines, and yeah, they're all fantastic. I mean, I think all of the runes themselves really show off how good the physics engine is in this game. Like, it's as good as there is out there, I think. Yeah,
it's got a very tangible sense to it. It's got a gravity to it that doesn't just feel, like it's for show. It actually feels, very weighty and satisfying. I think that's a good word for it, isn't it? It's very satisfying. And go on.
I think without the good physics engine, the shrines would be poor. They wouldn't be what they are. If the physics weren't as realistic as they've made them, it wouldn't work well at all. So it's just really really hats off to them in that respect, because they've taken something quite unique there.
Because physics are,
and it's become
sorry, I was just going to say, but physics are at the core of it. You're getting a sense for something, aren't you? And when you get a sense for it, you then can learn to predict how it's going to behave. And that's part of mastering physics, I think, which is part of the joy of it. But I interrupted you there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, these little sandboxes with the way the physics are in there, and all the different ways in which they like sort of teach you to use them in that respect. They're almost little sandboxes in their own right, where they're showing you, well, this is way of using this, and you use that in that way to get the orb at the end. You know, that's your reward for solving the puzzle, using the runes properly.
And I think it was a lovely change of pace, wasn't it? Because it's like you're in this wild world, and then suddenly you're in this almost like a laboratory type style, you know, controlled environment, wasn't it? Where you had to achieve something very specific, like a test almost that was being set for you. And I think for me and you personally, we could have had 100 more shrines easily.
Yeah, no,
we'd have lapped them up.
Yeah, and we've spoke to before that one of the worst bits of the game, which I'm sure we'll touch on, is the fact that there are so few shrines. And given the fact there's 120, most will think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, definitely bordering on the ridiculous. Well, one of our friends took a little bit of time to get on board with the shrine love, didn't it?
Yes. Well, I think he's there.
We pushed him into place.
Yeah, exactly.
So the last thing really, mate, just to cap off Eventide Island, take us away.
Yeah.
Did we do that on the weekend? Did we play that one?
Yeah, I did on the weekend. You'd already done it. So you said there's an island, don't go to it till you come up. When you come up, do it while you're here. And that's what happened. And that was really, that was an eye-opener for both of us in terms of how differently you could go about things. Like we played through that so differently. Like for instance, you killed the Hinox, I didn't. I managed to get the thing off him without, just by gliding down onto it.
I should correct that. The term is I cheesed the Hinox, which basically meant continually spamming bombs at him over a period of about 20 minutes until he finally gave up for the ghost. And you very cleverly, well, what did you do? You glided onto him, didn't you? Onto his belly.
So yeah, I went up to height, glided down, and when you can basically land on him, which wakes him up, but there's enough time to pick all of the weapons off of him and pick the orb that you need, or the key, I guess, to unlock the shrine. And then you can just throw it off him and run off, and then it just goes back to sleep.
Unbelievable.
So yeah, it's interesting. I think you'd said when you were watching me, you were like, oh, I didn't think about doing it like that, you know, and it was such an eye-opener in terms of how differently you can approach things.
I was kicking myself.
Especially when you have nothing, because you go on there with nothing. You've got none of you've just got your runes pretty much.
That's the concept, isn't it? We should probably just explain that. Yeah, you get stripped.
Yeah, we've sort of...
You literally get stripped, don't you?
So you go onto the island and just take everything off you. So you might go, I went there quite early on in the game because of the weekend, you wanted me to go there. So I went fairly early on in the game, whereas someone who's recently played, one of our other friends who's recently played quite late the game, but he went there late on in the game, so he was a little bit more equipped.
We had about 5 hearts, didn't we, I think, when we went on there?
Yeah, we did, yeah. So it was one-hit kills from the Hinox. You know, so...
It was high stakes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean...
Yeah, it was.
It was just, brilliant. It was like, you know, you see these pictures, I forget they've got a special name, when someone takes a picture of themselves in a mirror, and then it kind of just goes on forever.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's like a game within a game, isn't it? It's like this little...
Oh, yeah.
Little kind of... It just shrinks your world all of a sudden, strips you of everything you've earned up until that point, and in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way says, go on then, start again. Show me what you've learned. Prove exactly. Your mettle. And I just thought that was a brilliant little addition that obviously one developer at Nintendo woke up one day and thought, you know what, I'm going to go and tell Ayanuma this and see what he thinks. And I'm just so glad that it found its way into the game. I absolutely loved it. And like you say, I relish watching people play it because of the different ways you can go about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I think that covers off everything I wanted to say, Rich, about the best bits of Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, definitely.
You happy with that?
Yeah, I'm fantastic on that, mate.
So let's cruise into the worst bits, but just to say, we do think this game is the best game both of us have ever played. Firmly believe that before we go. And
warning, ridiculous criticism to come.
I'm afraid so. We've had a few months now, and some of that initial zeal that you have for a game and that sense of fun without really thinking things through, I suppose is a little bit has subsided, or at least we've been able to reason out now some of the bits we didn't like so much and what didn't quite work so well. So if I
think as a caveat to that, we knew we were going to make this video, and it would be wrong to go into this video and just say the game's brilliant without flaw.
Oh, yeah.
So we did definitely sit down and go, actually, let's talk about the things that maybe aren't amazing. Take the rose chimney glasses off and go, actually, what could be better? What was annoying? And that's what we're going to talk about pretty much. The things that were more often than not just an annoyance rather than a gameplay ruin.
Oh, and we wanted to be forward thinking, didn't we, Rich? We want to actually look forward to what the next Zelda could be, with perhaps some of these bugbears fixed. So Nintendo,
but the
if
next
you're
Zelda
listening,
game, just so we're clear, though, the next Zelda game is just 250 shrines, isn't it?
I'd buy it, mate. Yeah, in a heartbeat. Yeah. Absolutely.
I'll log on Amazon now and pre-order. Other retailers are available.
Just literally like, you know, the Matrix where those gun racks come up, just if it was a series of 250 shrines back to back and you just walk into each one.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, I'd have it, mate. I'd pay for that.
There's an iOS game all day long.
Yeah, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? If they did some sort of mobile phone.
I'd never get any work done at work, mate. I'd never get any work done.
You could use the touchscreen, couldn't you? Oh, anyway, we'll.
Oh yeah. I digress.
Yeah. So right. So if I kick us off on the worst bits, we've talked about it and touched upon it already because it's impossible to ignore. It's got a weak story, hasn't it? We've said the game world clearly comes first. The story feels very much like a bolt-on, like an afterthought, where they've realised, oh, you know what, we better give this some sort of cohesion and narrative. So you said yourself before, Rich, about it being an endeavour, a collective endeavour, and it was like parts of the game were given to different people, and they didn't meet in the middle on it. And I feel like that's a perfect example with the story itself. And just to give you a more specific example, the divine beasts, and what did you call what was the name of the guardians? Are they called the guardians?
Yes, yeah.
So you've got the Goron guy, you've got the Rito chap, who's very rude, you've got the Gerudo lady, and then the Zora lady Mifa. It's about the only name I can remember. And it's funnily enough the only name I can remember because the Zora one, the Zora domain, I suppose, and the Zora Divine Beast seem to have the most going on with it, seem to have the most story build up to it, and the most emotional weight to it. Whereas you look at some of the others, I mean, the Rito one was pretty forgettable for me. And it does feel like, you know, the Divine Beasts themselves maybe were bolt-ons, and they'd set almost separate teams within Nintendo, the challenge of coming up with these different stories. But there's no real cohesion there, nothing that really brings them together. I don't know how you feel, Rich.
Well, I think I've said to you before that the story is largely irrelevant. I mean, if the game wouldn't be no different if the story wasn't there. If literally some words came on the screen and went, go here, and that's all the story elements were, you'd still have the same play experience. It doesn't draw you in. It's not like the emotive game stories like the likes of Red Dead Redemption. It's not like that. It doesn't pull you in. That's not what makes you play it.
No.
The thing that makes you play it is the gameplay, and therefore the story is largely irrelevant to the gameplay, and is unnecessary in some respects. That's how I think poor is not the best word to use for it. Just
not there.
It's just sort of anemic and nothing.
No, I'd absolutely agree. And I think you've got to recognise, haven't you, that we've talked about one of the really good things about the game is the freedom there. And to be fair to it, well, if they had more of a cohesive story, more of a structured story, might you lose a bit of that freedom? Probably. So another thing that I suppose it's only a small thing, but it did frustrate me. Some of the menu cycling in the game. It wasn't too bad. I lived with it, but
yeah, like let's be clear. It's not Monster Hunter World.
Jeez.
It's not that bad,
submenu.
Yeah.
Yeah, Monster Hunter World can turn into like, you know, when you get those pop-ups on internet browser that just keep coming at you and you're drowning in them. It can feel like that.
Yeah, it's not like that, but I get what you're saying. It does feel a bit like, oh my god, I'm down a rabbit hole of menus.
I think it's made worse because a lot of the items in it, well, they're consumable, aren't they? So it's not just the food, the recipes you make are consumable, the weapons themselves are consumable. So you're constantly managing these, you know, inventory of weapons, keep getting the best ones, switching to the one that might be better in the particular fight you're in. And I just feel while the solution they came up with worked, it perhaps wasn't the most efficient solution that they could have come up with.
All they needed to do, the most frustrating thing about the game, in this respect, when it comes to menus, is you come across a chest, it's got a weapon in that you want, or you killed an enemy, it's got a weapon, dropped a weapon that you want. You go to pick it up, you can't pick this weapon up, you've not got enough inventory space. Rather than then have a little option, do you want to drop a menu, opens the menu, select one to drop, you have to put the weapon back down and then go into the menu, go to the weapons bit, click on it, select drop, come out of that, pick the weapon up again, then you can have the weapon. And it's like, why would they not just put a little menu in there that
cuts out that extra work?
Quick time. Yeah, exactly.
And I think perhaps,
I mean, it's nitpicking, don't get me wrong, but
I think the designers, they probably knew that themselves, and it was probably just getting so close to deadline, they thought, you know what, we'll just make do with what we've got. And it's not game breaking by any respects, but it's a quality of life feature that would have really take us over the line. So for the next game, fingers crossed. I suppose along with that as well, I would just say, perhaps change the ratio on the weapons disposability, if that's even a word. So the fact that they break a little too easy for me, and maybe, you know, fix the menus, but also if they lasted a bit longer, it would have been less frustrating. You'd find yourself in the menus a lot less.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, this one from me, Rich, was just a bit of a gag. They don't have enough shrines in the game, which we've already kind of touched upon. Really, we absolutely adore the shrines.
Yeah, which is a bit of a nonsense worst point, really. But I guess the point is that we really love the shrines. We'll have some more, please.
Do not leave that behind. Take that with you and embrace it with both arms.
Yeah.
I also wanted to mention that the Divine Beasts, whilst they were fun and they were different, and then they had these puzzle elements within themselves. You had to manipulate each one to, you know, kind of change the terrain and figure puzzles out. They were also a little bit bland. I almost didn't like them as much as I like shrines, so they were almost a chore at times to go through.
That's a really interesting point that when we mentioned earlier about two different development teams developing the story and developing the map. It's interesting because of the way the beasts are put into the game that they could have easily been made by another team. So a team's making them and they're literally dropped into place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? Because of how they are in the game, they're almost like a piece that could just be dropped in.
They're set pieces, aren't they? Just stuck in each corner of the world.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But then if that's a scenario, why did the people that made the shrines not have something to do with the beasts? Because you combine those two and it's unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they could have modelled them more on the shrines or taken a leaf out of the books. I mean, they were similar in respects. They were very technologically based, weren't they? It tried to share some of that same design. I did feel that they were quite bland, and certainly the bosses were you know, considering you've got all these really dynamic enemies out in the wild, and then you get these really formulaic bosses, which is just, okay, what do I do here? Oh, I do that. Okay, now I know to do that. Yeah,
it's done. Yeah.
And it's just like, go on.
With the only exception being the one in the desert, the camel, because the boss on that one, until you realise what you need to do, is quite difficult. But again, like you've just touched on, well, as soon as you realise what to do, it's
quite straightforward. But I think it's hard because in some ways Zelda's got this great history, especially Ocarina of Time, I remember, of having fantastic bosses and these really inventive ways you'd have to deal with them, usually based on the items you had at the time. And maybe that's part of it, because in Zelda's of old, you know, you had to kind of build up these different items you have, which would extend your capabilities in the world, whereas in this one, you've kind of got most of it to begin with. The runes are the main ways you interact with the world. So maybe that was a problem with that. But at the same time, I still think they could have done a better job. You know, they could have done something a bit different.
I think you would say that all of the bosses are largely forgettable. You know, compared to some, like you touched on earlier, that you look back with fond memories of fighting a Hinox. I don't look back on any of the boss battles and think, oh, that was good fun, that, you know, or oh, that was really challenging. Although I do think the boss that I found the most challenging was on the addition, the add-on. You know, the final boss on the add-on where you had to fight, which unlocked the motorbike, which is just a weird thing to have in the game. But that was the most challenging and, I guess, in some respects, rewarding boss. But yeah, the rest of them, they're just like...
I don't even remember that boss, mate. What was that boss?
So you do the shrines. Do you do the shrines? Or is there one big shrine on the add-on? But then when you go to get the orb off him, it initiates a fight with that, you know, the, like, I don't know, what are they, like, samurai-like people that sat there?
It's ringing a bell. God, that's crazy though. I've completed it, but I don't even remember it that much, which probably
And if you
proves the point.
You end up, do you go up on some sort of like a spinning plate or spinning?
Oh, it's coming back to me now.
And then you fight him on there, and he splits into about.
Does he change in size as well?
You know that. Yeah, it goes huge at one point. Yeah, that's the that's probably the best boss.
Yeah, it's a bit more inventive, isn't it? It's a bit different. So
and there's loads of different mechanics. It's not just like oh you do this, do you? Oh, okay. Like there's loads of different things that he does. You know, there must be 7 or 8 different types of things that he does. Gets big, splits up, surrounds you. Yeah.
And building on this, you know, we've got to mention Ganon Rich, because for me that was one of the biggest anticlimaxes of the game for me.
Yeah.
You're building up to this.
It wasn't even.
No, it wasn't, was it? You build it. I mean, I did do all the divine beasts and had all the shrines, so I was fully equipped and a number of Lionel weapons. Yeah. But at the same time, it's your big climactic moment. You want it to be, 1, a little bit more taxing, and 2, a little bit more, well, climactic. So, it is very forgettable, isn't it? It was just, it was putting a full stop at the sentence, but nothing more than that. It didn't feel.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't really even remember the cutscene afterwards. Again, the story, you know, it's
no. Yeah, again, that ties in, you know, perfectly with the first point about the worst bits, the boss battles and the story sort of hand in hand. You know, you're that bothered if they weren't there. I don't know.
Yeah, you're right.
Certainly, the boss battles need to be there, but maybe they just need more work on them. You know, they need that polish. They need that slightly different game mechanics, or slightly more mechanics that the boss does that lead you to be more inventive with what you're doing. You know, it seems so far removed from the puzzling and head scratching of the shrines. Once you've figured the bosses out, it's simple.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was just an A to B job, wasn't it? There was nothing in between. I think for me as well, again, we're kind of talking about the blander things that were less memorable, and one of those for me was settlements. Like, I enjoyed them, and they had things to do, and initially they were a change of pace to the kind of the openness of the world. But when I compare them, so Ocarina of Time, for example, some of the places and the characters in Ocarina of Time, for me, are so much more memorable. And maybe part of that's nostalgia, because it was a very formative time in my life. And like as I've shared, it was, it was a big step in my gaming history, if you like. But still, apart from, say, one of the characters I did like, I should point out, do you remember the builder guy, the camp building guy? The bald-headed building guy, he sorted you out with a house, and then I think he ends up referring you to one of his guys who builds the village for you on your little island.
Oh yes, I know. Yeah,
I thought that was cool. I think he had a lot of character in the way he kind of had a little dialogue with his building friend.
Yeah,
that was quite interesting.
Well, also you went back to him on multiple occasions, so you saw more of him. Most people you interact with in the game, you spoke to them.
I think that's a very good point, actually. Yeah.
Whereas you spoke to him multiple times because you kept having to get something to build the town, get something else.
Perhaps that's why in Ocarina of Time I find the characters more memorable, because there was a lot less of them, and because, like you say, they were utilised again, so you kind of got to know them in a sense. Whereas in this game, there's so many, you just lose the face in the crowd, don't you? You don't really get as attached to many of them.
Exactly.
And I think there's something there that they could look to improve upon. And as you just said there, Rich, in terms of side quests, you return to this chap and you ended up you build your own village, which is again one of the best side quests in the game. I think they could do with having more like that. Yeah, so I think the side quests, they could offer a bit more, in terms of the depth to them and the payoff as well. Instead of just ticking, I think in the end, there's still a number of side quests I've not even bothered with, because it just became a checklist exercise. I wasn't actually enjoying doing it. So that's something which left a little to be desired. For me as well, another worst bit, cooking.
Yeah.
As cool as it was, it did become very tedious, and being kind of forced, you can skip the animation, but you still had to kind of go through that ritual of getting parts, putting them together, dropping them in the pot. Whereas what would have been nice if you had a recipe book that you could have just literally selected, automatically created the meal, or alternatively, in one of the villages, maybe there's a takeout place or where somebody, you could just buy a wedge of a certain type of meal, and again, it would have been a nice quality of life fix for me.
Yeah, definitely, completely agree. I think the recipe list is the answer. It's perfect. You create recipes, they're noted down. That's another little mechanic for it, and then there's just a bit, and you go, right, make this recipe or whatever, and it says don't have the ingredients or whatever. That'll be such a massive improvement. Especially because as you get later on in the game, cooking becomes an essential part of playing the game. You need it, You need the buffs or the extra hearts that you can get, the yellow hearts that you can get, or whatever it is. You need them as the game goes on.
Well, it's one of those things, isn't it? That these all of these little, the way where you spend your time in the game, it all adds up. So we've talked about the menu difficulties, and while it's not a big deal, across those 150 hours, I probably spent a good 5 hours cycling through weapons menus. And equally with the cooking, I probably spent a good 10 hours just watching that animation and hearing go, make that little noise. And I think it just got a bit too much. And it could have been better designed in that front by Nintendo. Anything from yourself, Rich, that you wanted to mention?
I think you pretty much sorted. I think it's pretty much everything I've got down.
I wanted to jump on one last thing, and it's building on one of what we said was the best bits of the game. So the world, we talked about how there's a discovery around every corner. There's so much going on, and even when you think you've seen all there is, something new jumps on your plate, or there's a surprise in some way or form. And we also mentioned the pacing of the game is very good, and you've got these, you've got your shrines, divine beasts, Koroks. In the end, you even have things like the Yiga clan, don't you? Kind of surprising you out of nowhere and trying to deck you.
Yeah.
Which could be fun. But I think while you can say the world is very full, and certainly it feels like that, now I've had time to think about it, it's also, there's elements of it which aren't, which it becomes, well, for example, the Korok seeds. How many was there in the end, Rich? Was it 900?
900 or something.
And then you got literally a pile of poo as a reward.
Yeah,
I never did it.
No, I didn't either.
Good grief. But I read about it, and you did get a sense that in the end, because I think you could only take the Korok seeds so far before you reach the limits of getting, what did it give you?
Yeah, so you
your weapons and your...
Yeah, you use basically the Korok seeds to, you use the Korok seeds to upgrade your inventory, basically.
Expand your inventory.
Get more inventory slots, and after a point, you can't upgrade it anymore. So then it's like, well, what's the point of these things? And you think...
The rest of them are pointless, yeah.
Yeah, with 900, you're expecting something amazing at the end. Because anyone who's done that, and I'm not one of them, has spent a lot of time doing that. And
I'd want a helicopter, mate, or something like that, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
you go and cruise around in.
Yeah, sure.
And it was a bit of a laugh in the face. Yeah, something like game-breakingly good that you could rub in on everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was a bit of a... I mean, I kind of like the gag in a way because, you know, it was Nintendo kind of breaking through that fourth wall in a way, laughing at you as a player. But at the same time, you know, the Koroks were busy work. They were filler within this world. And I think, looking back on it, you know, there are elements of like that across the whole gaming world. I mean, we've talked about the story and the Guardians and how there's just not a lot there. And I think in retrospect, some of it can feel... So while initially when you're playing it, you think this world is full and complete and diverse. Well, in retrospect, it's actually a little bit hollow, isn't it? There's a hollowness there, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I completely agree, mate. Completely agree.
So again, you know, maybe the answer to that is you kind of scale it back a bit. Maybe the world was too ambitious. It had a lot going for it. And don't get me wrong, being able to see a mountain in the distance, scaling that mountain, you know, seeing something else on the horizon, and then snowboarding down it on your shield, it's wonderful. And I think you could keep that in, but perhaps just find a way of scaling it back somewhat so you can fill the world with more personality and more depth. That would be something up from me anyway. Definitely. Anything more to add on that?
I mean, yeah. I mean, we've touched on this on something else that we've spoken about before, where you come to graphics. Like Breath of the Wild is not the greatest demonstration of the most realistic graphics you'll ever see, but actually, like the likes of Red Dead Redemption is, stunning looking game, absolutely stunning looking game. But with that realism, becomes a completely different style of game. Like if Breath of the Wild was done a la Red Dead Redemption, like ultra realistic graphics, it would be a completely different game. It wouldn't have that super fun element to play. You'd have to have all this trepidation of, you know, bump into the wrong person and you're going to die, or, you know, the horrendousness that we spoke about that creates Red Dead as a chore. You would have to have that to make Breath of the Wild more realistic. You couldn't just go super realistic graphics, same gameplay. It would be so weird.
I'll just flesh that out a bit for the audience, just so they know. But yeah, essentially Red Dead, I once rang Rich in horror because I was so frustrated with the game because I was on a horse. I had to steal a horse as part of a quest. I happened to nudge into one of the villages in one of the settlements on the game. And basically my world burned before my eyes. I had a 30-minute pursuit into the outback, and then I ended up getting caught in some stream and then drowning in the stream. And it just left me thinking, well, that was a waste of 50 minutes of my life, and I got nothing for it, and it just felt very hostile. So I think that's where you're coming from with that one, Rich. That, yeah, and I know what you're saying. I think there's this tension there, isn't there, between realism and, you know, what's the best word to use? You know, arcadiness, an arcadey feel to a game.
Exactly, yeah.
That element of fun in Zelda is probably only possible because it doesn't tie itself so mercilessly to realism in the same way as Red Dead does.
Yeah. And that does bring us down an interesting road, as do we ever think there'll be a realistic looking Zelda. We've all seen those tech demos that people have done on the Unreal engines, and it looks stunning. But it does make me wonder, have Nintendo been very clever with what they've done with that? By choosing the route they've done, they've made the game type like it is, and that's why they're so good. You know, if you made it like those Unreal engine tech demos, I don't know, would it be lost almost?
I think you've got a really good point. And you know, broadly speaking about Nintendo, well, they've often erred on the side of, you know, more simplistic graphics and gameplay, and obviously keeping it simple for them especially has worked, because they focus on that pure element of fun in their games. They don't take them too seriously. Obviously, that's also been influenced by their hardware choices. At least from probably the 64 onwards, they seem to leave the model behind of having the most powerful console graphically, and they'd scrimp and perhaps put something out that was a few years old in terms of graphics technology. So that's obviously bared on their decisions. But yeah, I know what you're saying. They've obviously, would it ruin the Nintendo magic and formula if they suddenly switch to this highly intense, what's the word I'm looking for, Rich? Sticking to an ultra realistic formula.
Yeah, ultra realistic. That's the thing. Yeah. Mm.
So yeah, I think there is a tension there, and I don't know if it can be resolved. Maybe it's one or the other, and you just got to lump it.
I mean, as we touched on earlier, you could say the graphics could be improved, but as we've said, does that create a different game? So I don't know. I'm sort of in two minds on that. I'd like to see an uber realistic looking Zelda, but yeah, I don't know whether that would work for the kind of game that it is.
No, I know what you're saying. Part of me really wants to see, you know, them make good on that GDC trailer I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
They bring it into the not photorealistic, but somewhat more realistic. And this is obviously a big step on Wind Waker, isn't it? Breath of the Wild is much more realistic than the likes of Wind Waker.
Definitely.
So I mean, perhaps one day we will see it, but yeah, I think they've got to keep it accessible in exactly the ways we talked about. Definitely. I think you can't do that without losing the magic of Zelda. Cool. So I think we've talked about, Rich, we've kind of combined the worst bits and things to improve to an extent, but should we kind of delve a bit deeper into specifics of what we think could improve?
Go on then.
And be rolled into the next Zelda game.
Yeah.
So we've already mentioned, you know, a better story is going to be a big part of that. Deeper, more cohesive as a whole. More
emotive. You want to feel like you're invested in the story, because that's one thing it should feel like you have emotion towards the characters and the story, but it actually feels like you're just playing an arcade game. You could just pick it up and play. You have no interest in what's really going on other than your play experience. You're not bothered about the story.
No, definitely. And I would say, you know, look to other games on this one, Nintendo. If I mean, I don't want to be critical because it's amazing and I couldn't do what they do, but at the same time, I know, for example, I don't think you've had enough time with it yet, Rich, but God of War 4 for the PlayStation 4. So it's clear to me that in that game, the story did come before the world. You know, they've really focused on the story and the story beats and how it connects. And yes, at the same time, it's more linear. You know, it's not as freeform as, say, in Zelda, where you can just do anything almost in any order. But I think it's worth the sacrifice. That linearity is worth it, because it just creates, well, again, we can take another one, Red Dead Redemption. You know, you've got this very linear story that you follow, but around that, they've got this open world, this sandbox. You know, it's gargantuan, isn't it, in itself? Red Dead Redemption. And I won't say they've necessarily made the perfect formula themselves, but I think there's a balancing act there that Zelda could perhaps accomplish better in a different way. I mean, I don't know about you, Rich. Would you sacrifice some of the freedom for a better story?
Probably, at least some of it. The thing is, it's really interesting. They don't make a film and then go, oh right, well, what we're going to make the story about. they'll come up with a story, write a script, make a film, which is obviously what they did with Red Dead Redemption. You can't say anything other than that. And I would say, given the fact that now I think there's some reports in recent weeks that the games industry is now worth more than the film industry as an overall, by a lot now. They need to take a leaf out of their book. If they want good stories, they need to get good story writers. Take some of these filmmakers, say there's more money to be made, come and write a game. And then
I think it brings a different audience to the games as well, doesn't it? Because it's not just then a game for kids, you know, the old stereotype that's all games are good for. Games can most definitely be art, and good art, I think, as we've seen in many games.
I mean, you look at the TV adverts for Red Dead Redemption, they literally look like film trailers. And most of it is from the in-game engine, and they're just snippets of the story. It's literally a film trailer. That's what you've got to work with.
The actors' performances are stellar, aren't they? You know, exactly. For the most part, and it does leave. You know. I think I was very emotional at the end of Red Dead. We won't spoil that one too, perhaps. But
until we go on to that video.
We'll save that for later. But I definitely think that they could have done a better job, and I wouldn't have. For me personally, I wouldn't mind sacrificing a little bit of the freedom in Zelda for a much better overarching story, start to finish. So that's my perspective. I'd like to see a return of dungeons, even if it's only a few of them. But say in this game, if we kept the divine beasts and we had 3 more dungeons, I think it just would have. It's a bit of lip service to fans because fans love that old classic Zelda format. But I just don't think the divine beasts in themselves didn't do enough to replace dungeons. There was always that need, that wanting for something, bigger and better, which I think Dungeons of Old had. Yeah, you're right. We've talked about the more detailed settlements, more activities to do. One thing we didn't mention though, and this was a big one for me, which I think would have deepened the game and the experience, was weapon forging. So what I would love to have seen is a deeper system for bringing together all these resources you earn in the world, and then perhaps constructing your own weapons. Now I don't know how that'd look. Maybe that looks a bit more like the kind of arcadey recipe system in the game where you just put them together and you come up with these different outcomes. Or what would be brilliant as well is you had different components that you can form or, get resolved, if you like. Let's say the Gorons are able to, smelt things and create these materials that you can put together by component into this composite weapon. And, all with different kind of characteristics and different attributes. And I just think for me, it would have personalized the experience even more. And certainly, at times, the weapons are very throwaway and there is a finite amount to them. Something like this would have given you, infinite combinations of weapons. What do you think to that, Rich?
Brilliant. Especially given my engineering background, I think that would have been an amazing thing to do. All the raw materials are there to make stuff. You've got wood, you've got flint, you've got ores, you've got metals. You've got all these different things that could imbue it with, fire element or whatever, and make it so there's like 1,000 different weapons. There's millions of combinations. Maybe you combine 2 things that just make a different type of blade, but then you can have a different type of handle, a long handle, short handle. A very hard, nice gripped handle, or whatever. You're creating this massive other world that people would just love. They would spend time doing. And the people that love those kind of games, the open world, crafting, it would be a brilliant element to the game. I think it would bring.
Yeah, and it would be optional, wouldn't it? Like the rest of the game is really. You don't need to use it because you can get by without it, but it gives you such a hidden depth to it, and it's probably the monster hunters in us, isn't it? Kind of sharing the excitement about that, but I just think it could have just really, doubled down on that particular element of the game. We talked about cooking, we talked about the RPG leveling system. One thing I'd like to mention is that we talked about the end game challenges and really kind of building Link up with the costumes, the great fairies, and the resources you have to get to achieve that. And I suppose even with the downloadable content, getting this bike was a kind of a game-breaking reward at the end of it, which was part of the end game. But what would have been nice is if we'd had some proper challenges at the end of the game that would, I wouldn't have minded some real harsh difficulty. Almost in the same way, in your classic RPGs, you get islands that you can't go to. I remember one in Final Fantasy where you had to be literally level 90 something to be able to survive it, and you just couldn't get there. Now, I know it's difficult to do in a Zelda game, but I feel there could have been some end game activities dotted around that would have really presented a challenge to even the most seasoned of Zelda players.
Definitely.
So like Eventide Island, I mean, that in itself is kind of this harsh activity. Maybe they could have built on that and had a series of little islands dotted around where it'd keep ramping up in difficulty.
Yeah, I guess some people would say that that's what you got from the Master Sword challenges.
Oh yeah, are you one of those people?
No, not necessarily. I'm just saying what you're suggesting is, so an island and they ramp up the difficulty, that's exactly what you've got with the Master Sword challenges. Every time you complete one room, you go to another room, it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, no, I suppose you're right, and it was
That's
DLC.
Yeah. I know you're a massive fan of DLC, aren't you, Ben?
I've got mixed feelings about it, but I understand why Nintendo are trying to get on board with that, and they need to make more money for their shareholders and whatever. But we won't go into that one. We'll save that for another video. So the only other thing for me was double down on the mystical elements, the lore elements, the history, because again, I just think it gives so much more depth to the game, and it constantly keeps that intrigue and that mystique in the back of your mind, which is a lot of what entices you as a player playing video games. You want to think there's more around the corner, or there's a deeper meaning to what you're doing. Which I suppose in Zelda, as we've mentioned, some of the things we didn't like was, on reflection, a lot of it is a bit hollow and bland. And doubling down on those elements would have given the promise of those hidden depths. It would have actually, been actually bared fruit as you played the game, as opposed to realising, well, hang on a sec, why have I done that? Why did I talk to that person? So I think that's pretty much it from me. Rich, have you got anything else?
No, I think you've pretty much covered off everything that we were saying, really. I think we're pretty much there, aren't we?
Well, we talked quite broadly as well about where Zelda sits, I think, as we've gone along in the open world genre. We've compared it to Red Dead quite extensively.
Yeah,
and how Red Dead...
We've done that simply because it's the latest open world game we've played, and it's probably, you would argue, the biggest and I guess best open world game in terms of where it sits. It's the very latest technology. It's taken hundreds of hours, millions of pounds. 8 games developers, 9 gaming studios or something to make it. So that's got to be up there on what is a technical achievement. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best open world game there's ever been.
I think that's a really good point. And a technical achievement, it sits apart, doesn't it, from a gaming achievement?
Yes.
In terms of playing it for the fun, it's not all about that Red Dead. In some ways, the aesthetic of it, the realism has taken over that.
Yeah.
And that's why I think I have a bit of a bittersweet relationship with the game. And certainly something I think you could compare the two and say, well, you know what, Red Dead could probably take some leaves out of Breath of the Wild with that.
Yeah.
But vice versa, Breath of the Wild could perhaps look at the story in the likes of God of War or Red Dead, how they've clearly been designed very cohesively and as a more linear experience. So I think that's definitely a couple of bits that I wanted to mention. And even like Ocarina of Time, it is more similar to like God of War because it's this smaller world environment that has this more cohesive story.
Yeah.
But as we've seen in Red Dead, they can coexist. You can have a massive open world with all these things going on, but still have a really good story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's where it sits. I'm really excited to see what comes next in terms of open world games generally.
Yes, true. Yeah.
And I think they'll constantly be playing with those, some of these inherent tensions we've mentioned between realism, fun, open world, story. And maybe one day somebody will absolutely nail it to the mast in terms of that balance.
Although,
needs to be struck.
As we've said, we think they've come pretty close with Breath of the Wild.
Absolutely, yeah. We shouldn't get carried away with ourselves. No. It's standout gaming experience. Yeah. What do you think, Rich, will come next? What would you like to see next?
Well, we'd both like to see the next Zelda tomorrow, but that's not going to happen. I think that's going to be years.
I think if they really try and make a standalone experience like they did with Breath of the Wild, you're looking at 4 years, probably more.
Yeah, but we'll see. Yeah, I don't know.
One thing I wanted to just say was, it's possible, and I know that this has been publicised in other YouTube channels and other news outlets, but it's possible that they'll do a similar thing as they did with Majora's Mask after Ocarina of Time. So basically, they reused a lot of the assets from Ocarina of Time and managed to turn around a Zelda game. I think it was either 1 or 2 years. Obviously, there was compromises to be made. Majora's Mask, the world, is in some ways very differently constructed, and the dynamic is all about time. So you basically play the same day over and over like a Groundhog Day. And I think in some ways that allowed them to be very more considered with the content, so it didn't take a lot of development time essentially. So for me, maybe. And I've mentioned, maybe. I've mentioned this to you though, that I'd love to see them somehow do something similar. So reuse all the same engine and assets. And there was an old Zelda game for the Game Boy, I've got that as well. I actually need to replay that, called Minish Cap, which was all about this Link shrinking down to a miniature size and operating in this kind of shrunken world and the different perspective that brought. So I'd love to almost see them do that to Link in this Breath of the Wild Hyrule, and then we shrink down to this kind of miniature world where they can reuse the assets and just churn out a game much quicker. And I just think that would itch that scratch for me.
That would be cool. That would be really cool. I think that sort of brings us to a close, really.
That wraps us up. So without further ado, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please give us a like, and if you didn't, then dislike. If you'd like to see more of us, then please subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Binary Arcadia. There's one for the archives. Rich, the lever please.
Stamped and completed.